Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Well, we'll get started, although some more people may join us. Welcome to this first of two sessions sponsored by the Board of Elders on the topic of faithful responses to issues of reproductive justice. These sessions came about because last June, Gordon noted in a sermon that in 33 years of parish ministry, he had never spoken in a sermon about abortion issues.
We're hearing it twice.
If only all technology issues were so easily solved. Gordon acknowledged in June that he was speaking ahead of consistory's discernment on this issue, and also that the complexity of the issues, and I might add the strength of emotions, have caused even progressive churches to remain quiet. He called us to speak to the issues which intersect with inequitable access to health care, racial economic disparity, women's right to self-determination, forms of subjugation and violence, and more. That prompted deliberation on the part of the Board of Elders, which resulted in a communication to all of you in October. In it, we acknowledged that Hope Church had been privileged to backburner discussion and discernment on the topic of reproductive justice. Roe v. Wade had established a legal framework within which women could, at least theoretically, make their own decisions. The Dobbs decision from the Supreme Court threw harsh light on the implications of all or nothing thinking in this deeply personal and complex part of women's health and lives. We as elders also recognize that reproductive justice is a topic that can evoke strong and emotional responses. We are grateful to serve in a community that engages our faith in God with issues like these. With you, we seek to be a place where people can engage with the challenges of their lives before God's grace and feel loved and respected as a part of a faith community of justice, mercy, and humility. Now to the logistics for today. We have 5 brief presentations as Gordon and then elders respond to resources that we have spent time with. And between each presentation, we hope to have some time for some responses from you. What resonates, what prompts further questions, what else would you like to engage in discernment about? So with that, I'll invite Gordon to start us off.
Good morning, all. I developed a sore throat overnight. Did take a COVID test this morning, and that was negative, so that's good. But feel like I sound a little bit like Kermit the Frog, but doing my best and trying to save my preaching voice a little bit too this morning. Really grateful to be able to share a few thoughts with you as I've reflected on that dynamic of really not having spoken to reproductive rights issues in a church setting in all my years in parish ministry. I do think it's because I assumed that things weren't going to change. That's part of it. That knew this was a framework that was there and things weren't going to change. And so there's other things to focus on. So you could say, well, you didn't focus on that. But I do realize too that there was something about that, it really was framed that faith was only involved in a pro-life as it came to be involved view of things. And it was a faith perspective that I often didn't resonate with, but I didn't really seek out or know that there were other expressions of faith that tried to give a faith foundation in speaking about reproductive rights too. So I hadn't really sought that out either, and part of what this has done is helped to see just how much thoughtful work has been done on that, and that's part of what I think is valuable about what the elders are sharing. I think, too, that with the Supreme Court reversing Roe versus Wade last June, it is a time that's really challenging us to find how we as people of faith do speak in the public realm, in the political and advocacy sphere. And it becomes a moment of contrasting ways to do that. Is it about imposing Christian views on society, which I would say is about theocracy and hegemony? Or is it a Christian calling to public issues that brings values from our faith that try to build a community of well-being for all? So in some ways we're being forced to wade into those issues, but we think we have something to say then too. And I think it's in a similar way in political issues right now with Ottawa County that we're having to show that contrast. There's a Christian nationalism way of operating that wants to impose a certain religious view on society. Or can we be part of a Christian voice that wants to speak to justice as something that builds up and supports our society for all to be included? So as we do that with reproductive rights, it is a challenging thing, and I appreciate the sensitivity with which the elders have approached this. But I want to say, as a pastor, as a fellow Christian with you, that I think it is very appropriate and important that we are doing this, that we're joining with other faithful voices in wrestling on this. And as we do so, one thing that I want us to hold is that as we do so, that history matters. We don't just do this theoretically. And in our case, difficult things that are present in our history matter. I think that Supreme Court decision in June wanted to just make it sound like this is a theoretical, technical issue that you can take a stand on. But what I've learned in hearing from theologians such as Lisa Sharon Harper, a very important prophetic voice in our time, is that our very broken history in regards to how women have been treated, how women of color in particular have had violence and control over their bodies imposed for generations, that matters. And a decision like last June, in a way, can just seek to whitewash that history without trying to take it into account that has implications for what we will decide as a society. So I want you to hold that in mind. That's part of the perspective I'm trying to have as I bring to this too. I'm really proud of Hope Church for the faith and courage to engage with these issues. And I trust that we can do so with conviction and humility, and that we can do so with an openness and a desire to speak Christian faith in a way that is fruitful for our society.
Any responses before we move on to the next presentation? All right, Selene.
I just want to say that when this went around the table at Consistory, and we discussed the fact that it would be wonderful to do this, and we had to volunteer as elders for it, and Lois volunteered first. And since I follow Lois in all things, I said yes. So, and also a part of our group is Tammy Geib and Josh. What's Josh? Bojniak, who neither of them could be here today, ironically, since we had to reschedule all of this. We had someone, Paula, coming to speak with us, and then she had a family emergency, so yada, yada, yada. But Paula will be here next week, and what each of us did was take one of the resources that we had found that we thought were thoughtful and helpful, and so we've read these and are summarizing. So the one I have is from the Presbyterian Church USA. And I'm so impressed with them, as I am with the RCA, in terms of the way that they have open and inclusive dialogue on issues. So is this okay for the microphone? Everybody hear me all right? Good. So the Presbyterians have been wrestling with this issue, of course, for more than 30 years. And in 1970, When the General Assembly gathered, they declared that artificial or induced termination of a pregnancy is a matter of careful ethical decision of the patient, therefore should not be restricted by law. In the years that followed, they have adopted different policies and taken positions on the subject of abortion. You have this article in front of you. I'm just going to highlight parts of it that seem particularly helpful. So in 26, the General Assembly clarified their position on problem pregnancies. When an individual woman faces the decision whether to terminate a pregnancy, this issue is intensely personal and may manifest itself in ways that do not reflect public rhetoric and do not fit neatly into medical, legal, or policy guidelines. Humans are empowered by the Spirit to make significant moral choices, including the choice to continue or end a pregnancy. Human choices should not be made in a moral vacuum, but must be based in Scripture, faith, and Christian ethics. For any choice, we are accountable to God. However, even when we err, God offers to forgive us. Such a generous statement, and yet it centers the responsibility for those decisions within the context of a person's faith and Christianity. But then it goes on, and it iterates the way the church should be involved. And I love this part. The church has a responsibility to provide public witness and offer guidance, counsel, and support to those who make or interpret laws about policies regarding abortion and problem pregnancies. Pastors have a duty to counsel and pray for and with those who face these decisions. Congregations have a duty to pray for and support those that face these choices, offer support for women and families to help make unwanted pregnancies less likely to occur, and provide practical support for those facing the birth of a child with medical anomalies, birth after rape or incest, and those who face health, economic, or other stressors. I thought that was lovely, the way that they tell us each what our responsibilities are. The church affirms the value of children and the importance of nurturing and protecting their well-being, and the church appreciates the challenge each woman and family face when issues of personal well-being arise in the later stage of pregnancy. So that's all about problem pregnancies. And also in '06, they adopted the position on the bottom of the first page. We affirm the lives of viable unborn babies, and those well-developed enough to survive outside the womb if delivered ought to be preserved and cared for and not aborted. In cases where problems of life or health of the mother, the church supports efforts to protect and support both the life and health of both the mother and a baby. We look for churches, again, to provide pastoral and tangible support to women. We affirm adoption as a provision for women who deliver children they are not able to care for, and ask our churches to assist in finding good adoptive homes. And then in 1992, they adopted the most comprehensive policy statement on pregnancy and abortion. You can read that below, and I love the fact that there's agreement and disagreement on this issue within the context of the Presbyterian Church.
I just had the question that has to do with what has the RCA said to this issue, if?
Repeat the question.
The question is, what has the RCA said to this issue? Gordon?
There's not any, as far as I know, any recent comprehensive statements about abortion. It's been basically, been statements over the years that say that the church is morally opposed to abortion. So it's simply taken that stand. It really hasn't delved into the complexities of public policy or of court policy about that. So I would say, I'm not trying to be flippant about it. It's a pretty standard statement of the church, and the church thinks abortion is wrong. But in the ways that we see of these other statements, hasn't delved into really what this means in broader society or put it in that context.
I see our RCA expert, he might be subtly Googling this issue before he shares a statement with us later. I volunteered to read Trust Women, A Progressive Christian Argument for Reproductive Justice by Rebecca Todd Peters, who is ordained in the Presbyterian Church, is a member of a commission of the World Council of Churches, and is a professor of religious studies. While I've been clear on where I've stood on the issue of abortion, I've had some challenges talking about it. I was a junior in high school when the Supreme Court decided Roe v. Wade. And for all of my reproductive life, to let you in on more of my medical history than you may want, abortion was a legal option for women, although the political heat and culture wars have steadily ramped up. Over the past 4 years, I have given birth 3 times, miscarried, have walked with friends and family members through all kinds of experiences with pregnancy, lost pregnancies, childbirth, and children's health crises and deaths. I served several terms on the board of our regional affiliate of Planned Parenthood, which gave me additional insight into women's experiences. What was extremely helpful to me about this book was tools for reframing the discussion, to articulate better some of the areas of my discomfort, and to focus on the things that really matter. First, a definition of reproductive justice. The framework asserts 3 primary principles: the right not to have a child, the right to have a child, and the right to parent in safe and healthy environments. While only relatively recently have I begun to register this phrase, it originated in 1994 with a group of 12 African American women at a pro-choice conference. They made the point with stories, data, and passion that the right to choice, meaning access to abortion, was too narrow to be helpful to their experience. Reproductive health care was one issue, but the combined issues of race, class, and gender often limited access to any kind of health care. Talk of rights didn't translate into a meaningful reality. The disconnect became more obvious when looking at the context for deciding to parent. An environment of violence, poverty, limited access to resources, limited opportunities for education is not supportive of the choice to parent, which is another principle of reproductive justice. Reproductive justice says we can't obscure the context in which women are making their decisions. We need to be aware of the structural constraints on women's agency. We need to recognize that the choices we say women can make are affected by a variety of life crises, including domestic violence, poverty, and insecurity. Peter says, if we are truly concerned about the health and well-being of pregnant women and their children, then we ought to be addressing through our public policy the social problems that women cite as contributing to their decisions to terminate a pregnancy. We have seen that these problems relate to many aspects of a woman's life: affordable housing and daycare, free and dependable access to reliable birth control, a culture of racism that threatens the health and well-being of Black and brown children, prejudice against people with disabilities, and social attitudes that cause families to prefer boy children over girl children. Whatever problems women are facing, we need to tackle the social problems themselves rather than punishing women for the responsible decisions they make within their social worlds. We also need to note that control of women's fertility and reproduction has an uncomfortable history, and sometimes present day, including the breeding of enslaved people and the sterilization of Native American women within the last 70 years, and of people with disabilities or mental illness more recently than that. On the other hand, white women of the right economic class or ethnicity or religious affiliation have been encouraged to reproduce. I have long felt that the terms pro-choice and pro-life do us no favors in advancing our dialogue. Who among us would choose the label anti-life? Choice, on the other hand, is trivializing and positions the decision as optional for everyone, all the time, which is hardly the case. The binary framework is woefully inadequate for the complexity of the issues surrounding abortion. Pro-choice is a legal position, pro-life is a theological position. And abortion is never an abstract ethical question. It is the answer to a prior ethical question, which is, what should I do when faced with an unplanned, unwanted, or medically compromised pregnancy? That question can only be answered within the life of a particular woman at a particular time. Also woefully inadequate is our willingness to talk about when life begins. It's a theological question, answered differently by different faith traditions at different times and by different individuals. Quickening was assumed for centuries to be the start of life. It was the first relatively reliable signal, available only to women, by the way, before pregnancy tests and medical imaging were developed. An understanding of the science of pregnancy is extremely recent in human history, causing dissonance between modern people and ancient texts. The deliberations leading to the Roe decision refer to quickening, and the decision itself elevated viability as a moral touch point. Clearly, a mother provides life support, but in another binary construct, we limit our choices to one person or two, alive or not alive. Setting aside the problematic vocabulary of unborn versus fetus, Peters has adopted the term prenate to refer to the developing entity, a potential being who is in the process of becoming. She notes that the moral boundaries between the pregnant woman and the prenate are more fluid than contemporary debate allows, and the liminal moral status of prenatal simply does not fit into our extant moral lexicon, no matter how much we have tried to force it. The two exist together, woman and prenate, united and separate, two in one, a concept that troubles the Western metaphysical obsession with individual identity. Just think how much issue we have with the Trinity. The pregnant body is different from the not pregnant body. The prenatal body is different from the bodies of newborns or children. Both the pregnant body and the prenate defy the strict logic of individualism and exist instead within a liminal space defined by the potential for new life. But potential is not actuality. Many things happen between conception and birth. 60% of fertilized eggs are spontaneously aborted before pregnancy is ever confirmed, and another 10% are lost in miscarriages. If the prenate is recognized as potential life rather than existing life, abortion is reframed from a conflict between two individuals, the mother and the child, to a developing moral obligation on the part of the pregnant woman. If we can move from the duality of one person versus two to an understanding of pregnancy as a third state, we can also let go of what Peters calls the justification framework. This is the framework that says it's someone other than the pregnant woman herself who can set the conditions in which her pregnancy can be terminated. I have felt myself falling into this trap, and the conversations never go well. That's when you ask, how young is too young to be raped? How bad is a fetal anomaly? How bad is the woman's mental health, and who gets to decide? Given the current regulatory and legislative environment, the list of justifications goes something like this: prenatal health, victims of rape, victims of incest, life of the mother. Over 3/4 of Americans support abortion in those circumstances, and about 3/4 of abortions are based on other rationale. The vast majority of that 75% are concerned about their ability to financially support a child. 60% of those women are already parents. Half of those unwanted pregnancies occur although birth control is in use. For almost 40% of our population, wages do not cover the costs of living. The rate of abortions has generally been in decline, but among disadvantaged women, the rate is rising substantially. More than a third of those pursuing abortions were concerned about timing. They were too young, they wanted to finish school, they were too old, they were not emotionally or financially ready. Unstable, sometimes violent or non-existing relationships with a partner, parent, are another factor often cited. Peters was told by her own mother, "You shouldn't have a baby because you're pregnant. You should have a baby because you're ready to raise a family." Peters says, "In the Protestant tradition, Christians regard parenting as a sacred trust in which parents enter a covenant relationship to care for, nurture, and bring up a child to love and know God. It is not a responsibility to be taken lightly, but one that requires full knowledge of the commitment and the sacrifices required. If a person is to honor God and the covenant, then any covenant commitment to parenting must be entered into willingly." Reproductive lives encompass the health and well-being not only of the prenate, but of children, grandchildren, and communities. Women are fully capable moral agents, and we can see pregnancy as a period of potential life in which both the prenate and the woman share a liminal state. During that period, a covenant between the mother and the child is developed. The mother herself, with her partner, her family, her faith, her community, is equipped to discern whether she can enter into that covenant. The justification framework starts at the wrong point in the consideration. It has disrupted our ability to have authentic public discussions about the health and well-being of women and their families. Rather than asking whether abortion is good or bad and when, which inserts all of us into each specific situation and removes agency from women, a more useful question is, how can we create a social world where all women can make positive decisions about the size and shape of their families without being constrained by poverty, racial injustice, poor education, inadequate housing, low wages, or any other factors that prevent women from having real choices? And at the same time, we, as Christians, can promulgate ethical models for sexuality, models that commit to justice, partnership, respect, and integrity in relationships of sexual intimacy. It's a good book. Any questions or comments? David?
Just a question for clarification. Just a question of clarification. Is Peters saying, if I understand you correct, that a 7-month fetus is a prenate that has a different moral status than if that fetus were to be born and breathe? Does the act of birth confer a different moral status on that fetus, which is no longer a prenate?
I believe that what Peters would say is, that's an interesting question and not very relevant to most women's experience. So from a logical perspective, she would say, yes, it's a prenate until that child is no longer dependent on the parent for life support. The real world of late-term abortions is that they happen because of horrible circumstances. So the question is valid and can be misleading if it implies that women are casual about ending pregnancies late in the gestation. Do you buy that? You know, it makes my heart stop when you're the first question.
I wasn't implying any opinion whatsoever on the subject. I was just trying to clarify what her position is. If she does not think that there's a moral difference between that 7-month fetus inside or outside the womb, then it seems to me it's incumbent upon that argument to say, well, when is there a difference? I mean, so we're kind of driven back to the perennial question, but I'm not expressing an opinion.
Yeah, I would love to take that question and think about it some more, because she would again say that the prenate does last until viability, and of course viability in our current world gets earlier and earlier, whether or not it should. I think of some of my daughter-in-law's experience in neonatal intensive care nursing. But again, by the 7th month, there is almost always that covenant relationship established with the prenate. So it's maybe not relevant to the question of abortion.
Okay. About 30 years ago at Hope College, there was a convocation on abortion. And probably the person who most convinced me was one who took that very issue, is there a moral difference? But had put it within an individual rights framework. Let's suppose, David, that you have a particular constitution, blood type body that could save not a prenatal or prenate, but a brilliant thinker and writer. And that person, if they were hooked up to you, could survive the particular medical crisis they have. Does the state have the right to force you to hook up to that person? We're not talking prenate, we're talking about a brilliant person who could survive if you would agree to let them hook up to you, but you say, I can't do it, I just can't, I'm not well myself, it could threaten my life, whatever. Can't take 9 months to lay around with you to make you better. Let's suppose that you agreed and got hooked up to that person. 3 months into it, you find that your marriage is falling apart, your family needs you, there are troubles in your own life, and you say, I must be unhooked from this person. Does the state have the right to make you stay hooked up to that brilliant person to make them live? Or do you have the right to say, I have these things happening that are critical and moral and important, and I have to be unhooked from this person, and I'm sad that they're going to lose their life, but I can no longer be hooked up to this person? That argument, more than anything else in my life, thinking about abortion, gave me pause to think about whether the state has the right to force somebody to stay hooked up to the other person.
Other comments, questions?
A puzzlement and a wondering, and I don't have an answer. Why is autonomy the highest value? Because that's the framework on which everything is grounded here, in individual autonomy. And I assume I would embrace that for myself, but I'm wondering why that's the place that all of this is built upon. I'm not expecting you to answer.
Good, I'm glad.
Thanks, Dawn. I think that's a really evocative thing for us to wonder about. I would say I could see how it seems like autonomy is being made the primary piece here. Maybe it is. I think ideally it's autonomy within a community that provides that someone isn't autonomous, so that they're connected to a community that then can have someone make choices that are fitting for themselves. So there is a dynamic there. I do think that context too, that autonomy becomes important when there's a history in which that has not been the case at all. So that when there has been a history in which autonomy has been blatantly taken away, that to establish that becomes, for some folks, probably the main thing, and you could understand why that would be so important. So that's part of what occurs to me.
Hey, Lois. Cindy Valtier-DeYoung. I'm just thinking off the top of my head with Dawn's question about autonomy, and at the same time thinking about something I learned probably 20 years ago about the incredible infant mortality rate in the U.S., which continues to appall me. For such a developed country, we have such an abysmal infant mortality rate. So I'm thinking about that as we're talking, and thinking we put all this energy into the abortion, pro-life debate, however you want to frame it, and we think about agency and autonomy, when we should be thinking about community standards of health and how we support each other. And I was just thinking through, okay, when something happens to you personally, whatever illness or ailment or accident, it seems like suddenly things get really individual. Like, do I share this information? Who am I going to let know whatever this is that's going on with me? Who's going to share this with me? And I'm just thinking out loud about community and how we engage our community and our fear of how's the community going to react if I tell them X, Y, Z. And of course, there's lots of shame and guilt and Lord knows what else. So just thinking about how does a community support each other? How do we learn new things, which is what we're doing. Thank you. But how do we get beyond even healthcare disparities, the kind of, physician reaction when a person who probably isn't white says something gets a different reaction from a physician than I would. I'm just thinking out loud about some of that. Thank you.
In addition to the infant mortality rate, I'll just add that the U.S. is not a leader in maternal health either. And post-COVID, the rate of maternal mortality is rising, and it is at least 3 times worse among women in communities of color. Other questions or comments? Otherwise, we'll go to Larry to share a statement from Elder Josh Bochniak.
Thank you. I appreciated watching you, that you taught us the etiquette for holding the mic, and that is with your pinky out. That was nice. All right, so I will try to keep that. Second thing, I get a chance to ride a hobby horse just a moment. You'll notice that half the team is here. They are elders who can't be here. Last week I made an announcement about we need help with greeting. And this is proof. The elders can't be here all the time, even when they want to be. And so, again, we need your help, and I'll encourage you to sign up. But I also wanted to say that a worship greeter is an individual, a couple, or a family. So there's my advertisement. Josh looked at an article entitled A Brief Theology of Abortion, and the author is Matthew Meyer Bolton. Dr. Bolton is currently president of the Christian Theological School, a former associate professor at Harvard Divinity School. And Josh was kind enough to write his statement out, and so I will read his statement, so understand the word I is Josh. When I first encountered this piece, I balked at the notion that a theology of this topic could ever be brief. What Matthew Meyer Bolton has attempted here is to approach the topic of abortion from a big picture perspective in an attempt to communicate based on overarching concepts rather than chapter and verse defensive ideas. I find this approach to be both thought-provoking and satisfying in its own right, even as it leaves more room for questions than it provides answers. Matthew begins by laying the groundwork that any theological perspective on abortion rights needs to be met with empathy and respect. Quote, that there are understandable theological reasons to be opposed to abortion, end of quote. He then continues to set a 4-step framework to explore a theology of abortion rights based on the repeated phrase, life is precious. First, the Bible talks about life in the womb, and some Christian theological history has taught that abortion is, quote, morally unacceptable, end of quote. To see it as wrong is a perspective worthy of respect. Second, part of what makes life precious is the freedom to make decisions about things that impact our health and future. There are passages in the Bible that indicate life begins at birth, and there is a moral distinction between a pregnant person and a developing fetus. Some Christian theologians have taught that abortion is not homicide because the fetus, quote, is not yet a person, end quote. To believe on Christian theological grounds that in certain circumstances human beings have the right to choose an abortion is a conviction worthy of respect. Third, part of life's preciousness is our ability to weigh deeply complex questions. This question, with so many perspective nuances and contextual differences, cannot be settled once and for all. We must sort the details out ourselves as best we can and make decisions that fit our own perspective. We should not be forced into a path that conflicts with the freedom of conscience God has given us. It is a perspective that is both deeply theological and distinctively American as well. The country's founders, while being flawed in their own lives and personal context, argued strongly for the concept of self-determination in thought and belief. Just as God does not force orthodoxy upon us, neither should we impose our opinions of orthodoxy on each other. And fourth, we have the example of a group of American clergy, over 3,000 strong, calling themselves the Clergy Consultation Service on Abortion, who over the 6 years prior to the original Roe versus Wade decision saw it as a duty of their faith to offer help accessing safe, humane, affordable abortion procedures. They lived out their faith in this way because they saw it as their mission to, quote, to offer compassion. The author suggests that the decisions about abortion are so complex and personal that they cannot be made unilaterally for the individual. Individuals need the freedom to weigh their personal circumstances and then be met with compassion and humility by the people around them as they make those decisions. Quote, each family, each person must be afforded the liberty and God-given freedom of mind and the practical, neighborly, and legal arrangements necessary to decide for themselves which path to take, end of quote. What I appreciate about this article is its ambiguity and restraint for making a stance about the rightness or wrongness of abortion in all context. There is simply no way we, as individuals with varying backgrounds and life context, are going to conclude anything about this. What we need is a theology and approach that embraces compassion and allows individual decisions to be met with empathy, humility, and respect. Josh. It's a very readable article, so I encourage you to pick that one up.
Any questions or comments on that article and Josh's summary? Cindy?
Just a quick comment. I think I listened to a podcast on the clergy consultation service on abortion. It's pretty fascinating. It came out a year or two ago. So if you Google clergy consultation service and podcast, you'll probably get some first-person accounts of what it was like for them to do this. And if I recall correctly, these were folks across the board, interfaith, rabbis, Presbyterians, you name it. It was really amazing to listen to what they put themselves at risk for.
Can you remind me of the name of that group of 3,000 whatever clergy before Roe v. Wade came out? The name of that group?
The Clergy Consultation Services on Abortion.
Anyone else? We have one more perspective from Tammy Griswold, who I believe is working at the hospital today, so is unable to be with us. So Selene will read her comments.
Pinky. Tammy was reviewing this article, which I think is available to you either in the back or online with the link in our agenda for today. Women's needs are holy. Overturning Roe v. Wade ignores that. Sorry, okay. The title of the article is Women's Needs Are Holy, and Overturning Roe ignores that. Okay. I'm just going to read you Tammy's summary, and when it says I, it's Tammy, who is a nurse in the neonatal intensive care unit or in labor and delivery. I'm not sure what, yeah, okay. Yes. I would like to share some convictions Moira Harris, a black clergywoman, makes in her article, Women's Needs Are Holy. One thing I notice when I read Ms. Harris's article is her description of herself as both pro-life and pro-choice. I think a lot of us can resonate with that. All life is precious. We cherish the life of a fetus or prenate. I love that term. We also cherish the life of a mother, a father, and other family members, and those in our communities. The overturn of Roe v. Wade, however, points to a view that the life of the fetus is most precious of all. This overturn is for Ms. Harris a decision to take away from women the right of whether or not to have children under the guise of a concern for the unborn child. It certainly makes private reproductive health services more difficult to obtain for a particular population, or a large number. Ms. Harris is afraid for black women who are already 3 times as likely to die in childbirth as white women as a result of unequal access to health care, education, and other economic resources. Now, those with greater financial means will continue to have more options, while pregnant Black and brown women, girls, and those financially challenged will be forced to bear children, making their financial situation worse. My concern, and perhaps Ms. Harris's also, is will these children remain as precious to those who insist on their birth after they are born? Will those in power ensure all children are fed and given access to quality education and health care, or will the children of those with less be ignored? Ms. Harris believes in a God who is on the side of the oppressed and wants all to live a life of abundance. She views Jesus as the Savior and revolutionary who taught his followers to treat our neighbors and their needs as holy, which equates to striving to fulfill their needs as if serving God. Women's bodies